serious? What are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? Jeffrey Dahmer's full confession, a couple of 100 pages of pure madness. Necrophilia, dismemberment, skinning, lobotomy, body part preservation, cannibalism. Dahmer became pretty close to his interrogating detectives, Dennis Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, and provided a lot of detail to them. A lot of it in a pretty candid, offhand manner. It's incredibly hard to find Dahmer's confession online without it being behind the paywall, but it is in the public domain, so I've provided link to the PDF downloads. The first 63 pages are mainly forms and letters. The real meat of the confession starts afterwards. Operation Northwoods. Basically, the US government was going to carry out attacks its own people, as well as other military targets, and blame it on the Cuban government, so that the US would have a justified reason for going to war with Cuba. The plan involved blowing up US ships and even inciting acts of terrorism on the streets of America, killing civilians. It was even backed by the DoD and Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thankfully, John Kennedy vetoed the idea. According to Adam Walensky, JFK's speechwriter and friend at the time, JFK left the meeting and said, "And we call ourselves the human race." After the My Lai massacre, killing of around 400 to 500 innocent civilians in Vietnam after an army troop killed an entire village, the US government established a group to investigate other war crimes like this occurring in Vietnam, the Vietnam War Crimes Working Group. They found 28 massacres of equal or greater magnitude than My Lai that the public was unaware of, so literally thousands of innocent people killed by U.S. soldiers. The information has since been reclassified, but there were several journal articles on it when it was first released. Not sure if it's creepy, but certainly disturbing. Here's a link to an article about it by the LA Times from when it was originally declassified. If anyone is interested, I remembered the details wrong. It was 7 larger scale massacres and 203 reported events of war crimes, murder of civilians, torture, etc. The article goes into more detail. Not sure if it's declassified, but the case of Hisashi Aochi. He was a Japanese nuclear plant worker who was exposed to a lot of radiation which left him looking like a fallout gal. They kept him alive for 3 months, even though he was in a lot of pain. His heart even stopped 3 times in an hour, but they kept on resuscitating him. I don't know much about it, but it is interesting to read about. Says, when his heart failed the last time they didn't bring him back, because his family wanted him to have a peaceful death. There's nothing peaceful about the incredible amount of pain and suffering he was subjected to. His overall treatment was absolutely horrifying, but I somehow doubt he was conscious by the time his heart started stopping. The infamous Tuskegee syphilis study. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, also known as the Tuskegee syphilis study or Tuskegee syphilis experiment, was an infamous clinical study conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the US Public Health Service. The purpose of this study was to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural African American men in Alabama under the guise of receiving free health care from the United States government. The study was conducted to understand the disease's natural history throughout time and to also determine proper treatment dosage for specific people and the best time to receive injections of treatments. The Public Health Service started working on this study in 1932 in collaboration with Tuskegee University, a historically black college in Alabama. Investigators enrolled in the study a total of 622 impoverished African American sharecroppers from Macon County, Alabama. Of these men, 431 had previously contracted syphilis before the study began, and 169 did not have the disease. The men were given free medical care, meals, and free burial insurance for participating in the study. The men were told that the study was only going to last 6 months, but it actually lasted 40 years. After funding for treatment was lost, the study was continued without informing the men that they would never be treated. None of the men infected were ever told that they had the disease, and none were treated with penicillin even after the antibiotic was proven to successfully treat syphilis. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the men were told that they were being treated for bad blood, a colloquialism that described various conditions such as syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. Bad blood, specifically the collection of illnesses the term included, was a leading cause of death within the Southern African American community. Not so much creepy, but rather pretty freaking cool in a 50s sci-fi B-movie kind of way. Project 1794. Top secret program with the US Air Force working with a Canadian aeronautics company to build a supersonic flying saucer-like aircraft that would be able to simultaneously wage psychological war on our Cold War enemies as well as physical war. It was also designed to be a bomber. The project was scrapped when they figured out that not only would it be too expensive to build enormous flying discs, but also that crafts of that shape were near impossible to fly at supersonic speed. In 1984, a psychic remote viewed the planet Mars for the CIA. In his remote view, he's asked to travel backwards to several points in time in Mars history and several points of interest using coordinates. The psychic ends up describing things like some sort of planetary catastrophe, strange structures, including pyramids, and the strange inhabitants on the red planet. Whether you believe in aliens and conspiracy theories or not, it's definitely weird that an official branch of the government has run experiments like these. Culture was pretty fucked up. CIA created mind control program that tried a bunch of different things to control behavior in people. Paid people to be LSD test subjects by picking them off street and paying them in cocaine just to leave for them dead after, among other stuff. Unabomber was a test subject and it fucked him up and lead to him killing people. Also, the author of One Flight Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a test subject. The CIA was working on a heart attack gun back in the 1960s-70s. It started off as a conspiracy theory, but gained enough momentum nationwide that it forced the US government's hand and they finally admitted the theory was mostly accurate. Short version, they never had a fully functional heart attack gun, but they did have a nearly working prototype. The idea was that it would have a very small projectile that would be laced with a chemical that would induce a heart attack and leave a hole smaller than one left behind by a syringe. While they never had a fully working version, they did have a prototype, but abandoned the project once they more or less had to admit the conspiracy was mostly true. I find this to be among the creepiest/scariest things declassified by the government simply because of the consequences of them admitting to having been working on such a weapon. For one, it shows that the US government was very serious, at least at one point in time, about being able to take someone out with it being easily traced back to them. Whether they would have used this on private US citizens or on foreign agents is debatable, but they easily could have used it to silence people who were pushing to further advance civil rights or people who generally spoke out against the government in general. It's also scary because it makes you stop and think how many conspiracy theories are correct or at least scarily close to being correct. Disclaimer, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I do find them interesting and tend to read up about them, but have never bought into very many of them. I mostly just find them interesting. Definitely the Jonestown death tape. That shit proves to be a solid way to lose all chances of sleep. So, here's some context. Jim Jones started a cult called the People's Temple, yes, without the apostrophe, and eventually they moved to a new settlement they built in Guyana called Jonestown, named after their leader. Since he made them believe he was some form of the Messiah, as a lot of cult leaders did, he could control them all to do whatever he pleases, and one of the things they did was practice drinking Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid as commonly believed, to prepare themselves for the time when they commit revolutionary suicide. These practices were just normal Flavor Aid/Kool-Aid, but Jones told them it was poison just to see their reactions. When the time came, someone recorded what was, essentially, the sounds of people drinking Flavor Aid laced with cyanide, alongside a fatal cocktail of other substances, many victims including young children, which you could hear screaming in the audio. 900 or so people died, only a few didn't. This was the biggest loss of American life in a deliberate act until 9/11, and there is an audio recording of it. And just a very strong reminder, this wasn't mass suicide, this was mass murder. Many people were willing to die at his hands, but all the children and some of the adults didn't. Since all of them were forced to take the drink, it wasn't their own choice to drink it, it was Jones's. So, whilst people believe that it was a suicide, they were all duped into being murdered by Jim Jones. Edit. Fix the largest loss of American life fact. to add in a deliberate act, and talked a bit more about how it was mass murder, not mass suicide. Not really classified, but very creepy. The business plot of 1933. The wealthiest businessmen of America, like the names you see on banks and buildings in America today, allegedly formed a plot to overthrow President FDR and install a military leader in his place. Their choice was a US Marine general named Smedley Butler, as he was a decorated leader of the highest rank. Butler, a loyal patriot, played along until they were seriously about to attempt to collapse the US economy by holding the financial stability of the country hostage. He rolled on them and testified to Congress about the planned coup. No one was prosecuted. General Smedley Butler may be the reason the world does not, officially, have a society like the United Corporations of Rockefeller, Morgan and Chase. Source: had an activist US Gov professor. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe.